Welcome to this week's episode of the FullScope Cybercast, Safeguarding the Digital Frontier. I'm your host, Matt Van Pelt, and with me today are FullScope IT's CTO, Dan Welk. How are you this morning, Dan?
Doing great, Matt.
All right, fantastic. And also with me today is Brian Amadeo from Business Development. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing great, Matt. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. I guess we'll get this party started.
Breaking down the buzzword.
This week's buzzword is ransomware. Ransomware is a specific type of malicious software or malware that cybercriminals use to block access to your user's files or computer system until a ransom is paid. Usually, this involves encrypting files on the victim's computer or entire network, rendering them inaccessible. Following the cyber attack, the hackers demand a ransom, typically in the form of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, in exchange for the decryption key that will unlock the encrypted files. Wow. Dan, could you explain some of the typical ransomware attacks?
Well, the primary type is what you just described, where bad guys try to sneak malicious software onto your network, and then it just finds all of the typical files, Word files, Excel, whatever they can get their hands on, and just erase them and write them back to the hard drives encrypted, so that you need to buy a key from them to decrypt it. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't actually have those keys, and they're, once you give them the money, they may just disappear. One of the worst types of malware to get not only would encrypt the files on your hard drives, but will also take a copy of those files, and then they'll look for things like credit card numbers and proprietary customer information. And then not only will they be looking to get you to pay to decrypt your files, but they may also be looking to get you to pay to guarantee that they won't share your data with somebody else. But once again,
Guaranteed.
Once you pay, there are no guarantees with criminals, and they may leak the information anyhow.
Yeah, why wouldn't they make money on it 3 times over, right?
Right. And then if they do find something like credit cards, they may just sell the credit cards on the dark web to people who are going to look to drain customer accounts. Typically, if credit card numbers are stolen, or even if they're accessed in some way, businesses do have a responsibility to alert all of their customers and provide credit watch
Monitoring,
services.
like some form of
credit monitoring
credit
services.
monitoring. Yeah.
So the ones that, say there's a ransomware attack and there's not credit card information or stuff like that involved, wouldn't a decent backup cause it, to be, there's no issue there? You can just say, keep them.
Well, backups are certainly going to be the first line of defense. If your data is encrypted, being able to restore it is very important. Depending on where the malware gets into the system and what level of access it has. For example, if an administrator opens it, one of the first things that they'll do is try to find the backups, and then destroy the backups. So we recommend that there needs to be an immutable set of backups, which means the administrators on the system itself do not have permission to delete the backups for a certain number of days. Make sure you set that for the minimum number of days that it would take to realize something like this had happened. Accounting for long weekends and things like that.
What's reasonable there, Dan? Is that would a month be unreasonable? Like, when would an organization need a short time frame to delete everything they've got? Right, that doesn't seem like a typical.
A month would be reasonable.
Okay.
I've set them as low as 7 days where storage costs are an issue, but a month would certainly be reasonable.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was trying to think what case scenario it would be a really short time frame, like maybe days, and then maybe if it was government contracting or something that could have.
I don't think I really don't see any reason to ever set it less than 7 days, because when you go less than 7 days, you really run the risk that the problem may have been destroying data before somebody noticed it, and you may let the important data fall off the back end of the immutable backups. But typically, I would want to look at least 30 days for the immutable backups, and that doesn't mean you don't have other older backups like monthlies or quarterlies or yearlies, but simply the stuff that's impossible to delete, or as impossible as you can make it, should be 30 days.
I feel like 007. Your backups will self-destruct in 20 days.
Isn't that more Mission Impossible?
Certainly. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that came from the Bond series.
Oh, I thought it
It's
came
the
from
whole
Inspector
genre.
Gadget, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
You're right there.
The problem with the exfiltration attacks, where they're demanding money to not give your data away, is that there can be a very high cost to that. There can be reputational issues with your business. There can be private data for designs of proprietary products, and there can be a very high cost. So even having really great backups does not protect you from that, and that's where things like cybersecurity insurance, you have to look at your policy very carefully. They may be able to help with some of those issues, but having a good layered defense to stop this from happening is very important. Between having your data encrypted at rest on mobile devices like laptops and cell phones, and good antivirus endpoint security, and in some cases something like an EDR system, so that you can figure out where the attack came from and what data they accessed, because very often they may claim that they have all of your data, but you might be able to prove that they only got their hands on one or two files.
That's the and I know we've talked about this on some of the other episodes. But that's the thing. There's so much more to it than the actual ransom, right? So you had mentioned the perception or what might happen from a company standpoint, because if the information you were storing, right, gets to the wrong hands and gets out, then people have a different perception of your organization. So even if you get back online quickly, even if you remediate, protect, refortify, whatever, there's still this backlash, right? There's this other portion, this perception of that you let this happen to my information, and then loss of business from that. And there's such a bigger picture here than everybody thinks about. Like, oh, I'll just pay the ransom, or we have a backup and it won't affect it. Like, I'm pretty sure the way our systems are set up, right? If we had some form of a breach, even my mobile device is going to get anything like productivity-wise is going to get wiped because of the way we manage it. And I don't think most organizations think that way.
Yeah, and the threats are constantly evolving. So it is important to look at what security provisions you put in place. The endpoint software on your PCs and laptops and mobile devices. Um, it's constantly evolving, and there's new functionality that's always available that you need to look into because it doesn't always just get enabled automatically. And things like firewalls also, they're always putting in new features to combat new threats, and you have to really look at what the features are and make sure that you're applying them properly to keep your protection levels as high as possible.
Well, that is a fantastic segue into our tech tip of the week.
Well, if it isn't a tech tip.
Strengthen your ransomware defense by understanding the threats and knowing how to respond to them. If you're interested in learning more about ransomware and how to protect yourself from it, check out our blog post called How Can Companies Avoid Ransomware? There will be a link in this week's episode description, and we will also have a link posted on our website, FullScopeIT.com.
Yeah, we didn't really go into that at all. Responding to these attacks when they're successful is a whole separate issue than what they are and how to protect yourself.
Yeah.
I think that also plays. I'm gonna add one more thing, if you don't mind. I think that also plays into the. A lot of people bury their head in the sand a little bit because they think like, well, my information nobody cares about, and it's that what I end up having, like, so when we're having conversations with people, I'm like, you're right, it means something to you, and that's what they know, that's what they care about. They're only asking you for money because they know that's valuable to you for whatever your reasons are, right? It's not the actual, like, they don't care what, say if someone handles or ransoms the ERP, it's like, we don't care what your product or your manufacturing company, and we don't care what your processes are. We know you do, and that you can't work without them. So that's really what we're taking for ransom, is what's important to you, right? It's just like a family member in a mob situation, right? It's same thing. It's not that they want the family member, it's that the family wants that family member. But I think that gets missed. I think people just think, oh, what we have in what we store is not important to anybody else.
Yeah, and even if you do have all the backups in place and they're immutable and your data isn't sellable, the backups are not always instantly recoverable, and you may have to roll back several days to before the malware took over the system, and recovering the work that was done can be very costly.
There is a story of an organization that we were working with, but we hadn't started managing them yet, and this was before my time. But from my understanding was they did get a ransom, and then, like, say a month after they decided maybe not to use our services, and then was like, help us, what do we do? Well, there's nothing we can do now, like, it's too late, and they went out of business. I want to say their ransom, from what I understand, was like $450,000, which they couldn't afford, and they didn't have the insurance in place. Like, whatever they did, the insurance wouldn't cover anywhere near that. So it put them out of business. And it's a real thing, and it really happens. So, I mean, like, we hear these stories, right? Or, like, we're going to talk about another one coming up here in a minute here, but like, they're out there. It's constantly happening. And this burying your head in the sand thing is not going to last. It's really not.
Thanks for that story, Brian. And that brings us to our story of the week.
This is the story of the week.
Listen up!
Very topical. It's from IT Brew. MGM Resorts hit by alleged ransomware attack. And there was a very telling quote right from the article from VX Underground from the, do you call it a tweet anymore? Is it called an X? What do you call it when somebody does something on Twitter now? They said they put it on the X.
That's a whole nother topic for a podcast.
They tweeted on the X? All right. They tweeted on the X. All ALPHV ransomware group did to compromise MGM Resorts was hop on LinkedIn, find an employee, then call the help desk. A company valued at 33 million 900 wait 33 billion
That's
900
billion.
million.
That's
Whoa,
billion.
that number was bigger than I thought. Was defeated by a 10-minute conversation. Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
How do you protect from that?
I think there's some interesting points in that article. One is there's a projection of how profitable it can be to do ransomware attacks. They're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars by the end of the decade. But the other important thing is, like, they didn't say exactly who they attacked, but the fact that they could just call the help desk and pretend to be an employee really goes to show that it's not just like the high level executives and the IT management that are being threatened. Really, any employee who has access to the network, even to just put in their time cards, might be a valuable asset to do a lateral attack once they've gained access to any employee's accounts. And I think that's another thing that needs to be considered when you're looking at securing your network. Is you really need to secure all the employees, all of the devices, all the networks. Nothing is less vulnerable than anything else because the attackers will just keep prodding around until they find that weak link.
Like this seemed like it was a process failure to me. Right? How is there not
Definitely.
a few levels of verification for that employee?
I think
know-
they may have had the process in place. It may have been a training failure. They really didn't
Could be.
go that deeply into what the failure was. But having processes that make sense, that actually protect you, and maintaining the training on them is very important. Very much like we do simulated phishing attacks to see if anybody falls for a phishing attack, and we use that to ensure that the trainings are being done properly. Especially when it comes to a help desk, the help desk processes have to be followed clearly, and you need to make sure that all the employees are up to date on what they are.
I had an interesting conversation with a cybersecurity engineer yesterday, and I was looking at the dark web report for their domain while I was on the phone with him, and I said, "Hey, by the way, this particular email has a overwhelmingly greater amount of exposure than any other." And he goes, "Wait, can you repeat that?" And he goes, "I don't know. I don't have that email in our organization." I'm like, "Well, just so you know, that email's got a lot of password exposures. You might need to figure that out." And it was one of those things, like, as he's live looking in, he's like, I don't know who that email is. Now, they do have, this particular organization did have some locations that were on other continents, I'll say it that way, in other countries. So, and some of those, they maintain their own policies, ways they go about it, different departments. It's not one IT department for the entire organization. So that being said, he goes, it could, but I'm like, either way, you should know who that individual is, or at least now you want to look into it. But it was, anyway, it was interesting to me that they couldn't verify that person, like, while we were in our meeting. And I think organizations, like, that's a tell sign in some way.
Yeah, I guess in like bigger corporations, how would a help desk go about verifying employees? Are there ways, like known ways to do that? Things to put in place? Like ask them for their employee ID or
That seems like an easy one, right? Yeah. Do you have an employee number?
Yeah.
But would the help desk have access to that HR record? And again, that's a policy thing, but or a procedure thing, but I don't know.
Local
If everybody
verification.
has access to everything, where do you draw the line in some cases? And MGM's, I don't know what their employee count is, but it's obviously large, right?
Yeah, they
their
have
head count is,
locations
but
all
it's-
over the place. They like in subsidiaries and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
all over the
yeah.
country, probably the world. I don't know.
This gets exponentially difficult as organizations grow. In smaller organizations, it's very easy to have like a single point of contact who knows all the employees and can help verify that people are who they say they are. But in a larger organization, some sort of procedure needs to be put in place to look at the org chart and make sure that you're talking to somebody that you can verify they are who they are, who can help you verify another employee. There needs to be some sort of chain, especially when you're talking about regaining network access because of lost credentials or a lost token. You need to be very careful with verifying the users.
So what do you think? Did they tell you? Did MGM tell the public yet what their exposure was for PII for guests? It's a lot of guests across their.
I haven't seen any details about what was actually taken.
I would hope so because this article was from September 14th. So
Yeah, I know that the outage itself was very, very costly, and that a majority of the systems were unavailable, and especially for a business that's dealing with so many customers all the time, it can be very, very costly.
Their ad for a I don't know if it was quite CISO level, but they had a high level network ad. They were looking for a new employee basically to head up their cybersecurity, but it was like expect like 12-hour days for the next 9 months. Like it was really like, it's like this is going to be a long, difficult process. We need someone that's willing to roll up their sleeves and really dive in for a long time. Like, where's that 22-year-old kid that's brilliant and has no other life? Because this is going to be your life for a while.
I've seen a lot of enterprises where the changes the changes required to maintain proper security levels are perceived as being too painful, causing too much time to go into training for the processes that the employees will have to learn, or the systems that have to be upgraded and the downtime. I think a lot of managers need to really understand how to weigh those risks, and a little bit of downtime up front to get things secured properly can save you a lot further down the road.
And it takes time. That's a difficult balance, right? It's how much do I put into protection? If, again, I don't know what I'm going to need when, but that's a lot of time, I think, from just the employees getting trained. You can put physical things in place from the network, right? You can even cloud tools, whatever, all that stuff. But the training takes time. People have to absorb it, have to get used to it. It's a continual thing. So really no better time than the present, right? To start that process.
Absolutely.
any final thoughts on this week's story?
Other than I'll add, there was two other really big ones that just happened in the last week or so, and that was the Sony PlayStation, the online side for that. That was held at, and I believe that was I don't remember, $50 million ransom. And then Johnson Controls, who is owned by Tyco, and they do building automation, including some federal or government buildings. They're a $25 billion a year company, so pretty close to MGM here. And they got hit with a $51 million ransom, and they were able to access their building automation side of things. So just that division, like Tyco is a big, name, and it has a lot of subsidiaries. But Johnson Controls, this particular one, was the one that they grabbed. But that's massive. Like there's a lot of fallout from that one.
And I think the lesson for small and medium businesses is not that if a huge enterprise like that can't secure themselves, what chance do we have? Because that's simply not true. The important lesson is that you need to really put that same level of focus on any size business, and not assume that you're too small to be a target.
Yep. And the budget's got to be relative. I mean, if you think about some of these, I would bet MGM, what do you think their annual IT budget is? I don't know, $10 million a year? I mean, it's got to be massive between the employees themselves and then the actual tools that they use, right?
Probably a bit more than that.
Yeah, probably is a bit more than that. That's what I said. I was like, that's probably really low. So it's all relative, right? But I think that actually the small businesses may have the advantage here because I think they can spend a whole lot less in a very reasonable amount and do a very similar level of protection in comparison because there's also the desire's not there as much for the actors.
Yeah. Well, and the good news is the big enterprises when they need to put in $100,000 firewalls to protect their network, the same code base that protects those firewalls scales down to firewalls that are $1,000 or $2,000, if not a little less expensive than that. And you can get the same protections for a small and medium-sized network that's available to everyone.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like, I really think it's relative, right? And they can, for a very fair price, they can do a really good job at protecting themselves.
Absolutely.
That's what I preach all day long. Those are the conversations I have all day long.
Awesome. All right. On that note, we'll wrap this week's episode up. So thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the FullScope Cybercast, Safeguarding the Digital Frontier. Also like to thank the panel this week, Dan and Brian, and we will be back next week with another episode. So until then, stay behind your firewall.